Why, hello! It's Miss Gina, and you're at Gina's Planet. Today I thought we'd read a book for some older kids, The Mysterious Shrinking House by Jane Louise Curry. Read with Miss Gina. We're on chapter 1. One ducky. Mindy stood by the wide barn door and watched the two big boys carry a faded sofa out into the sunshine. Its green plush was worn almost through on the arms, and a terrible hole on one of the cushions showed that a family of mice had lived there in upholstered comfort. Mindy hoped it was an old nest, or that the mice had moved out at the end of the winter, for it would be alarming to have your house suddenly lurch up and fly at a jiggle out of the sweet, musty coolness of a dark barn into a hot, glaring, fly-swarming barnyard. Mindy watched the sofa down the slope, and as the boys set it down in the crowded sunny yard, between the rusty disc harrow and an old car with a rumble seat and no wheels, she saw her mother just beyond, poking through a large carton. From the way her mother abruptly stopped poking and turned her back on the box, Mindy guessed that she had seen something special. This book doesn't have a lot of pictures, so you're going to have to imagine the pictures in your mind. Something that would make the box worth bidding on. When the auctioneer put it up for sale, he didn't dare let on beforehand, you didn't dare let on beforehand that you were interested, or everyone would wander over to have a look, and someone might outbid you or fluster you into bidding more than you really wanted to spend. The wide lawn between the barn and the yellow farmhouse was full of such boxes, along with furniture, old farm equipment, stacks of flower pots, rolled up snow fences, old tires, even a basket with a sweet-faced calico cat and 5 kittens. Mindy's father had taken one look at the kittens and at his wife and said, "No." Mr. Hallam knew Mrs. Hallam's soft heart too well not to make that clear long before the auction got underway. Farm sales were great fun, and occasionally you might stumble on a real treasure. But farm sales were also dangerous, more so than store-bought bargain sales. For whoever came home from a bargain sale with 6 cupless saucers and a plate with an ugly brownie green picture of a large building with arches and columns and fancy lettering around the rim that said Panama Pacific International Exposition, San Francisco, 1915, ? As Mr. Hallam pointed out, when you already have a cat-hating dog and a half at home, the and a half was because it was a very large Great Dane named Horace. The last thing you need is a basket of kittens. Mrs. Hallam had promised to be good, but already Mindy could see that her mother was having her usual trouble, how to keep her back turned to all of the boxes she was interested in. There were so many of them. The boys came back. They were the auctioneer's sons, and they had been hard at work for hours. To judge from the crowded lawn, from a corner under the hayloft, they brought out an old sun chair and a pair of wooden skis with broken leather foot straps. The canvas on the sun chair was faded and ripped. These, the last? Yeah, some junk. Who's going to pay good money for beat-up stuff like this? Like Pop says, you can sell snowshoes to a goose once the bidding really gets going. Here, let's make these one lot. The older of the two tied skis and chair together with a piece of cord. Hoo-wee! That's it. Come on. I got the cokes down in the little creek around the other side of the house, getting good and cold. They went off at a trot, the sun chair skiing between them. Down on the wide porch of the farmhouse, the auctioneer called out, "Okay, folks, now you've seen it all. Let's get started. Some real nice items this time. Mrs. Warnecke says she'd like to have taken it all to Michigan with 'em, but old man put his foot down." The crowd laughed comfortably. Mr. Weech said the same thing at every auction in the county, changing only the names. Everyone moved nearer the porch, and Mr. Weech's assistant carried the first carton to set it at the top of the steps. "All right," Mr. Weech bawled. "Who's going to give us a shove off? What I'm a bid for this here box of elegant crockery." Mindy slipped out of the sunshine and around into the cool of the empty barn. For a moment, everything was a purple gloom around the glare of outdoors. She rubbed her eyes, and slowly it all came right. Yet there was a strangeness to it, something in the air besides the pleasant mustiness of old hay and vanished cows. "Well, nobody likes to be empty," Mindy said aloud. The words hummed around her, and a bird fluttered among the high rafters. The hayloft ran along above the line of empty stalls, as well as across one end of the barn. It was a peculiar arrangement, and looked as if it had been made so that a hay wagon could be backed in through the wide doors for uploading or unloading. We upload on a computer. We unload in a barn. Even though there was a loading door directly into the loft from outside and a claw-like hay fork rigged with rope and block and tackle under the eaves, perhaps the barn had doubled as a coach house in the olden days. Mindy thought it was a very old barn. Mindy's father had guessed that the farmhouse was older even than the Hallam house, which had been built in 1808. Peering into each of the stalls in turn, Mindy saw that a little trap door above each manger opened down from the loft above, for putting the hay down, she guessed. Near the far wall, a rickety stair that was almost as steep as a ladder led up through a hole in the loft floor. Mindy sneezed unexpectedly, and then froze with her hand over her mouth. Above her head, she heard a wild scramble of alarm, squeaks and tiny feet scurrying for cover. The sound was a little like dried peas rattling across the floor, like the squirrels on the roof at home. Carefully, because there was no handrail, she climbed to the 5th step of the stair, from where she could see the entire loft. A small pile of straw in the one corner stirred faintly. Mindy smiled and bit her lip. Mice! Maybe the ones from the old sofa. Watching quietly, almost holding her breath, her own eyes at floor level. Mindy saw a bit of straw move, and in the shadow behind it, 2 small, bright black eyes watching back. Mindy tried not to blink, and after a moment the mouse crept out, twitched a suspicious whisker in her direction, then abruptly made a dash for the far end of the floor above the stalls, where he whisked behind a sagging door. Mindy scrambled to the top of the stair and followed. It was an odd place for a storeroom or a granary, if that was what the door led to. She pushed it open gingerly, not knowing what to expect. The mouse scurried out again with an indignant squeak. "Sorry," Mindy chirped after him with a giggle. "I'm not snooping, not mousing." The smell was old and dry and dusty. There was no window in the tiny room, and the shadows were deep. At first, it looked to be as empty as the rest of the barn. Mindy stepped in and out of the doorway by squinting. She could make out a broad plank leaning against one wall and a lumpish heap in a corner. And Mindy wrinkled her nose with distaste as she bent down for a closer look. With a piece of straw, she pulled at a small hole in the cobwebbing, tearing it wider. She didn't like to touch cobwebs. They stuck and didn't want to wipe off. It was a window. Mindy stared. A tiny window with tiny panes, too filthy with grime to see through. One was broken. Mindy touched it with a hesitant finger. It was a window. Frantic, Mindy ran out of the pile of straw to snatch a large handful, startling the family of mice into headlong flight in all directions. Running back, she used the straw as a whisk broom, brushing away a wide swath of spider web, heavy with the dust of years. She caught her breath. There, just above knee level, was a chimney, the gable of a pitched roof, and under the eaves of the gable, a small round window. A dollhouse. Mindy ran for more straw and, forgetting her good Sunday dress, knelt in the dust to wipe away the worst of the cobwebs. Bit by bit, the gray veiling pulled free, and spiders, or no spiders, Mindy picked the last strands off with her fingers. Then she leaned over and blew. In the stuffy little room, the dust rose and spread around her like a thick cloud. Her sneezing made it even worse. Backing blindly through the door and groping safely to the wall, she finished sneezing in the loft. When the dust had settled, in she went. It was a beautiful house, wisp of web, greasy black grime under the coating of thick dust, mouse dirt, and drifts of grain husks, so ancient that they dissolved at a touch. Nothing of all this could hide its beauty. Someone long ago had spent loving hours building it, for it was truly built, not painted, plywood tacked together the way store-bought houses were. The roof was laid with tiny slates, and the walls had the look of real cut stones set with mortar. The whole was mounted on a thick slab of wood and was too heavy for Mindy to lift. She tugged at one of the handles screwed into the base, but was not strong enough to pull the house more than an inch or so away from the wall. Oh, oh, oh! Mindy flapped her hands in frustration. She felt she would burst if she couldn't see inside. A ripple of laughter, followed by Mr. Weech's delighted cackle, floated thinly up to the loft. Sold! Sold to Miss Kathy Gobble for $1.02. Come on up and fetch it down, honey. The high, reedy voice, far away but clear, came through the cracks between the heavy barn siding like a voice from another world. Sold! Sold! Why not? At least it was worth trying. She ran to the steps. A dollhouse? Mrs. Hallam was skeptical. It's not like George, Weech, and company to overlook something like that. Are you sure? You do look a sight. What were you doing? Rolling on the floor? Oh, not out loud, Mama. Somebody'll hear. Of course I'm sure it's a dollhouse. I looked. Mindy was in agony of excitement. Even if anybody else did see it back in there, they'd think it was only a pile of rubbish. That's garbage or trash. Please, can we stay till the end so's I can bid for it? They will sell it, won't they? She fished in her dress pocket. I've got 63 cents, she frowned. Mr. Hallam grinned. 63 cents for a dollhouse. Here, have the only nickel your mother hasn't borrowed. Solemnly, he passed her a 5-cent piece. 68, Mindy was doubtful. It's all grungy, but I don't know if it's that grungy. You might throw in the 2 cartons of empty pop bottles in the back of the station wagon, her father suggested. He slid a teasing look at his wife. Your mother may have 3 or 4 pennies left, too, after she's bid on all her boxes and that stack of picture frames. Mrs. Hallam added absent-mindedly, 12 pop bottles. Mindy took her father at his word, counting it up in her head. It's still not even $1. Her father laughed. I can always write a check if you're that serious. I'd want to take a look at the thing, though. Dear me, and here I thought you were too old for dolls. Wasn't that what you said a Christmas or 2 ago? Mindy was indignant. It's not the same thing at all. This isn't for dolls. It's a house. Sort of like a model. Besides, even grown-ups collect old doll furniture. She sniffed, holding back a laugh. Even some I know. Mr. Hallam, whose collection of ship models included a galleon with a captain's cabin richly furnished in the old Spanish style, nodded soberly, with the note in his voice that told her he was still leasing. He said he was still teasing. He's not leasing the model ships. He was teasing her. Oh, well, if it's something of historical interest, you'll see. She could tell he was curious. The bidding on the cat and her kittens came to a close, and the Hallams turned their attention back to Mr. Weech. Mrs. Hallam had been outbid on 1 box of her boxes and was ready to do serious battle for the next item. An old fruit crate loaded with metal scrap. Why, Mindy could not imagine. Still, her mother usually knew what she was doing. The Weech's boys carried the dollhouse between them awkwardly because of its weight. As they threaded through the crowd, people drew back, wrinkling noses and hiding smiles. In the bright sunshine, the house looked incredibly filthy, its lines blurred by the layered grime of many years. Even Mr. Hallam was a little dismayed. Ahem. Mr. Weech cleared his throat. I have a bid of 68 cents and 12 lemon soda bottles from Miss Araminta Hallam. Do I hear 75 cents and 3 cartons of bottles? Kathy Gobble fell into a fit of giggles. Mindy blushed at the general amusement and held her head a little higher. Are there any other bids? None? Gone once? Gone twice? This lot sold to Mindy Hallam for, hey, Mr. Hallam, do I hear a bid for a dozen handsome matched bottles? Give you 24 cents, George, Mr. Hallam called. Done. Sold to Mindy Hallam for 92 cents. People drifted away in a cheerful humor. Pickup trucks and cars were loaded, and the farm road became a cloudy ribbon of yellow dust all the way out to the highway. The Hallams were last to get away, except for 3 teenage boys still struggling to load the tireless Chevy coupe onto the bed of an elderly truck. Oh, Jack, must we have this dirty thing in the car? Mrs. Hallam looked at the house doubtfully. There was barely room for it behind her own purchases. I have just the thing. Mr. Hallam rummaged under the seat and came up with a newspaper and a large ragged sheet of plastic. Still he spread on the open space of the station wagon floor and over the stack of frames. Then he stood back so the Weech boys could slide the house in. He wedged it securely between the other boxes and slammed the back door. "Don't fret, hun. It may look awful, but it doesn't stink, so it won't contaminate us." He slid behind the wheel and switched on the ignition. "Yo, Mindy, sit down," he warned. "No hanging over the back seat. You'll get a good look soon enough." Mrs. Hallam smiled. She has that wide-eyed collector's look. I'm a fine one to talk, though. I came away with several nice things and 2 real treasures. She bounced up and down a little on the seat in her pleasure, and Mr. Hallam smiled. She and Mindy were a pair. "Did you see the ugly speckled frame?" Mrs. Hallam asked. "There's a funny little oil painting on a corn husking party in it, and from the clothes the farmers and their wives are wearing, I'd say it must date somewhere between 1850. I didn't dare examine it too closely for fear of showing how interested I was, but I think it may be a linden park. Linden parks are very scarce, but even if this isn't one of his, it's a valuable primitive." Thank heavens I was the only dealer here today. No one thought the Warneckys would have anything worth bothering about, I suppose, and we knew Foxy Weech had unloaded all of his imported antiques at last Saturday's sale. "Maybe the old stuff was left by the people who lived here before," Mindy suggested. "I bet my house was anyhow. It took a long time for it to get that gooky. But what's the other treasure?" She slid a skeptical look at the crate of broken tools and parts of lamps. Now, Mrs. Hallam grinned and turned to her husband. "I'm sorry about the junk," she said. "It can go straight into the trash barrel, but there's a pewter platter in with it that's rare as rare." "This old thing?" Mindy leaned over in the seat and pulled it out. "Oh, do be careful. It's battered enough already. See those hammer marks? Those are important. And the little marks stamped on the rim? These on this side are the emblem of Henry Will." "Henry Will?" Mr. Hallam was impressed. "He's 18th century, isn't he? And what do the hammer marks mean?" "That it was hammered out from a flat sheet of metal instead of cast." "I think so, and that's very unusual in early American pewter. Mr. Henry Will was more of a perfectionist than most." Mindy was not much interested in platters. "Do you suppose my house could be 18th century?" she asked. "I hardly think so," her mother spoke kindly. "You see, this would have been the frontier in those days, and people would be having enough trouble getting their own houses built and their land cleared to have time for making elegant dollhouses." "That's right," Mr. Hallam agreed, but his voice held a note of puzzlement. "But you know, now, it does have an 18th century air about it. We'll have to do some reading up on dollhouses. It just might be that Miss Hallam's house is the real treasure of the day." He swung the station wagon off the dirt road into the highway. Mrs. Hallam smiled indulgently. Mr. Hallam was always spinning exciting tales to himself, seeing adventure where there was none. He and Mindy were a pair. And that's the end of chapter 1. And we'll stop there. Next time, chapter 2. So I hope you liked that little tale. All right, remember to keep reading. So grow your brains, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.